So the thing that has been really challenging for Texas Impact and other advocacy organizations and for you all as advocates during COVID is a lot of things that we have taken for granted about interaction with other people, including people in positions of leadership, is that they're harder to do when we can't be in person. So this presentation is going to walk you through some strategies that hopefully will get you through the uh, the COVID pandemic in terms of being able to be an advocate even when you can't, for example, go to the Capitol. But I do want to say, after the pandemic is over, well, I don't think anybody should be thinking in terms of going back. We're going to be going forward. And going forward, the strategies that we've developed to cope with not being able to be in person and kind of some of the COVID strategies that we've developed, those things are going to continue to be part of our lives. And the easy example that everybody knows is all of our churches that have gone to online worship are having a conversation about, once the pandemic is over, we're not going to be able to just turn that off. There are people who have come to depend on that online worship for a variety of reasons, either because of limited mobility or because they are remote. They're in an area where they have to go a long distance, and it's really great for them to be able to get online instead of getting in the car. So same is true for advocacy. So what do we even mean when we say advocacy? And those of you who've been to UMW before know that we talk a lot about what the meaning of advocacy even is. Advocacy, more than anything else, is about being for something. It's not about being against something. So even if you wanted to talk about being against people leaving their dishes on the counter, which is a common advocacy issue in my household, we would talk about, I'm for everyone taking responsibility for their own dishes and always putting them in the sink so that they don't make other people crazy. So there's always a way to talk about something in terms of what you are for. What we want is what's important, not what we don't want. Policy advocacy is a particular kind of advocacy that has to do with speaking about public policy, what you want for the broader community, not just what you want for yourself. And telling your own story of your direct experience in your community, which comes from direct services that you've participated in providing, or experiences that you've had as a user of services or a consumer of programming, or just a person who's in relationship with other people in your community. Those stories, your story, is what helps make the outcomes of public policies visible and relatable and manageable in terms of thinking about what you could do differently. Just saying, I want everyone to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is a little bit conceptual for a local or state legislator who's trying to figure out what they need to do to make those ideals real. Your unique, authentic expertise to be able to say, when I say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I mean low-income seniors in my community are facing eviction. And I want to tell you a story about one who has come to my church for assistance. That's where we move from concept to reality. So your story is the bedrock of your interaction with public policy. The Brady Bunch, not really, but the levels and branches of government are the bedrock, the foundation for the public policy apparatus that you have to work with. My experience is that for a lot of people, and I've been doing this job for more than 30 years, not with Texas Impact, but I've been working in public policy for more than 30 years. It's my observation that not understanding this basic framework is what trips a lot of people up in their advocacy. So let's go over it a minute. And I don't know how Americans handled this before the 1960s, but luckily we have the example of the Brady Bunch to guide us. So what the levels of government are federal, state, and local. And the branches are legislative, executive, and judicial. Texas Impact mostly works in, I can't remember what character this is. It's not Marcia. It's the one below Marcia. The state legislative branch. That's mostly where you'll get information from us, action alerts from us, have to do with the state legislature. Sometimes we're in the Marcia Square. That's Congress. That's where we would maybe say call, Washington, Congress is considering something. Occasionally, we might be in the executive branch. If we are, it would generally be at the state level, rarely at the federal level. Rarely are we going to call on you to ask the president or a federal agency to do something. And almost never does Texas Impact work in the judicial branch. That's not really something that we see as an appropriate target for constituent advocacy. So if we say, call your member of Congress or your US representative or your US senator, we mean Washington, D.C. The place those people meet is called the Hill. It's the Hill with 2 L's. I don't know why. There was a typo yesterday and I saw it and I just didn't even fix it before today. So sorry about that. Lack of diligence. But Congress works in the Capitol that is located on what we call the Hill. The legislature works in the building that people who work in the advocacy community, like you all, refer to as the Pink Building, the Pink Granite Building in Austin. It is located on kind of a rise on the Capitol grounds, but it is not called the Hill. And so I know people probably think, well, that's just jargon and why would you emphasize it? But I want you to think in your mind, when you are thinking about the people you're trying to influence, picture the building they're in, concretize who it is that you're trying to influence, who you're trying to advocate with, and it will help you locate yourself for them more concretely as well. And that's really important. There are also at the local level, school boards, city councils, county commissioners, and we could make a big long list of the entities at the local level that you can advocate with. And you all, I cannot describe the multitude of physicalities and configurations that those people exist in, but you should make it your business to find those out about your community. There are a lot of crises going on in the world today and in the United States. And I know that it is really hard to focus. It is hard for me to focus. It is hard for Texas Impact staff to focus. And we know that it's hard for you to focus with all the stuff that is coming at you. Being able to parse this Gordian knot of all these interactive issues into some kind of working model so that you can picture in your head how those things are connected, how, COVID is a driver of problems in our communities, but those problems existed before COVID happened. And sometimes they exist because of public budgets that haven't provided for resilient systems that can be resilient to something like COVID or a natural disaster, which is why we find that we have to provide emergency services to people who are in natural disasters or man-made disasters that, one, be better if they hadn't happened in the first place, and two, those people could have been prepared. Anybody who went through Hurricane Harvey knows those people could have had flood insurance if anybody had thought to make a rational system and explain to them why they needed it, but a lot of people didn't. All of these issues are interrelated, and so it's not that you have to pick one. People a lot of times will say, pick one issue and just stick with it. That's the way to handle the Gordian knot, is just get rid of everything else and only focus on one thing. Faith isn't a single issue phenomenon. The issue with faith is when the United Methodist Church or the United Methodist women think about any one of these issues, they bring to mind the global experience that makes all the issues fit together. So it is really important. Don't say, I'm just going to only work on this one thing and not pay attention to anything else. The opportunities don't come that way either. If the opportunity is to turn the Medicaid expansion gear, that gear is going to turn some other gears too. So don't say, well, I only want to work on disaster relief and not be attentive to the way it interacts with any other thing. But think about them as systems. But the other thing is that during COVID, the ways that we used to learn about these systems, the ways that we used to understand how the gears fit together, oh, I see why the people who come to our food pantry are experiencing these other kinds of problems, and I can see that those things are related to public budgets, and I can see that those public budget issues are related to some other issues. Those opportunities are diminished because those historic ways that we have of gaining our authentic lived experience, which are like volunteering for things like a food pantry and doing group activities together and living in the community, being in our stores and restaurants and parks with other members of the community so we can see what's going on. Those things are diminished right now. Many of them are off limits to many of us for at least the next, iteration of time, 6 months, maybe a year. And also the historic ways we have of advocating. So going to the Capitol, stuff like that, that's all diminished too. Texas Impact wants to stress, don't go to the Capitol. Even if it's kind of open, it's not open like that. People, you're going to the Capitol, apart from putting at risk public servants who are trying to have to be there to do their job, it's also putting you at risk, and then you're putting yourself in the position of taking COVID back to your community. Just don't do it. It's not necessary. Instead, what's necessary is that we get creative. So during a normal legislative session, during a normal year, we have activities we're used to. going to the Capitol. Normally you would have been going to the Capitol on Tuesday in a couple days with Texas Impact live in person. Josh would have given you a tour of the Capitol. It would have been great. You'd have met with legislators and had your pictures taken. We're not doing that. You would have been going, some of you, to rallies, local rallies for things in your local community, or you'd have come to the Capitol to wave signs with a bunch of people on the South Steps about issues that we care about. You'd have been going to public meetings. You'd have testified at the legislature in person, or you'd have gone to your city council meeting, or things like that. We're not doing those things right now. We will again. But in the meantime, there are some things that you've been doing that are the things you need to emphasize. One of them, we can't go to district visits quite the same, probably, although it probably varies district by district. But you sure can drop things off for people in the district office of your legislator, and they still need love from you. We'll talk about that a little more later. So we can still do some district drop-offs. We're still making phone calls for sure. We're still doing social media, and we're going to talk a lot about social media in a second. We're doing Zoom now that we weren't really doing before. And in the future, we may find, while we're all sick of it right now, later we might find there were things about Zoom that were really great, and we might decide we like to continue doing some of those things. And of course, there's the Postal Service, which came through like a champ in 2020, and that you all were talking about in your previous session about, well, gosh, we can be mailing things to people. That's absolutely true. Mailing things has, the luster was off of the US Postal Service a few years ago, and people wondered, oh, well, maybe soon we won't even need mail because we'll all be using email and social media. And I think this year has taught us, no, we all like to be able to have a postal service we depend on, and we like getting mail. So good, that's good. So let's talk about social media. Here's my thumbnail of what social media, what the universe of social media is. Facebook is where you and your friends are. Instagram is where your children and grandchildren are. Twitter is where your legislators and the media are. And TikTok, I learned this weekend, is a black hole from which you will never return. Don't do it. Stay away. I'm sorry I investigated. And there are other things too, but it's really Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Those are the trifecta of social media for advocacy. Advocating on Facebook looks like sharing. It's a place where we share with each other, including we pray for each other on Facebook. We share each other's joys and sorrows on Facebook. In terms of advocacy, we share news, we share events, we share stories and experiences. It's not a good place to get a lawmaker's attention, and it is definitely not a good place to go to try to change somebody's mind. Getting on Facebook and thinking that you're somehow gonna explain to somebody why they should change political views or policy views, I think if 2020 taught us anything, it's that's a fool's errand. But Facebook has a lot of other kinds of utilities. So this is just 3 examples of, I think, ways that Facebook is valuable, important, irreplaceable. This one is a woman who got a COVID vaccine and is showing and show and tell, right? She is saying it wasn't hard, and her friends can get on Facebook and ask her questions about it. And they are asking her, hey, where did you find out about that? I want to get that too. And so that's a great way to share her experience and for her to help other people, bring other people into her experience. This video that Sarah Cruz from our staff posted, she was in the Valley, and there was an opportunity to talk to Julian Castro, former mayor of San Antonio, and she was able, because she was there, to share that with, for one, the other Texas Impact staff members, but also all of you all, and you all could get on and see what he was saying right then and feel like you were part of it, uh, you've all been sharing this event, and that is great because that's what gives people the idea that it's not just an advertisement for some event that somebody is doing. They can start to see that, no, this is us. We're all in it together. That's really important. So if Facebook is for sharing, Instagram is for showing. So showing is a little bit different from sharing in that you don't necessarily expect anybody to be following up with you quite the same way. On Instagram, people show events or activities. They show different kinds of digital spaces. They show stories, and a lot they show examples. So they show examples of a book they're reading, or a particularly effective way of communicating a message that they saw somewhere. Instagram is not a good way to get amplified by the media unless you actually have a relationship with someone who's in the media, and I'll show that on the next slide. It's not also a great way to get confirmation of your impact. It's not, you can tell that people have seen what you've posted, but you can't necessarily see what they've done with it. So just be aware of that. But this is this is an example of someone showing this is a book that they thought was important. This was, so the thing about the media is, what I want to say is, this is a reporter and a person who has a relationship with that reporter who did weigh in. But what the reporter was showing was, this is a great message. This was a great way of communication that she saw out in the world. And this is the way Westbury United Methodist Church was advertising something. This is not the same thing as a Facebook post where they expected a bunch of people to ask questions like, would you rather have peanut butter or almond butter for this snack drive? I mean, this was an advertisement that the event was happening. So Facebook, Instagram, and then Twitter. And Twitter, if Facebook is about sharing and Instagram is about showing, Twitter is about informing, and that includes informing people about your views and informing people about information you've found that you think it's important for them to know. And the people you're informing on Twitter generally are lawmakers, media, businesses, colleagues in an activity. So for these purposes, I'd say all of you on this Zoom are colleagues. You are all colleagues in UMW. And sometimes we use it to inform our opponents. We'll see an example of that in a second. Informing organizations at an organizational level about something, informing influencers. The two things I want to stress about Twitter that you don't want to do are, one, you don't want to get it wrong. Don't be retweeting stuff without making sure you're tweeting something accurate, or something that sometimes people have come up on Facebook too. Don't retweet something thinking that it happened today when it turns out it's news from 2006. And don't get into fights on Twitter. It's not worth it. Like with Facebook, you're not going to change anybody's mind. Unlike with Facebook, it's going to be really, really easy for a lot of people to pile on and turn your well-meaning effort to explain your position into a brawl. So these are examples of Twitter advocacy of a couple of different kinds. This one over here is an example of how Texas Impact direct tweeted. So we used the message function of Twitter, which is for people who have done messaging on Facebook. It's sort of the same principle. You can send a message to just one person. We used it to make sure that that reporters saw something that we had emailed them. So we emailed a lot of people a press release or a media advisory, and then I individually tweeted it to them just to make sure that they got it. And you can see that reporter said, thank you, because her email box fills up just like yours do. And she used that, that extra bump. That was what helped her see that we had sent it to her. This is an example of a little message that I sent to a legislative staff member saying, I need to talk to you about a bill. There's a serious problem and I have to get with you. And because people use Twitter a lot, are likely to get a notification on their phone that they got a direct message on Twitter. That was the easiest, fastest way for me to get at him. If I had wanted to say, we're having an event next week and I just wanted to invite your boss, this would not have been a good way to message that person. But during the legislative session, when we are late in the session and you get an action alert from Scott and it says, we need people in Representative so-and-so's district to get at them right now and tell them that there is really a problem with a bill, or there is a really good bill. It's really important that it pass. We've worked so hard on it because we think it's so important. If you have credibility and karmic points with your legislative office, now is the time to use those karmic points and go ahead and tweet directly at that legislator or their staff and say, I'm a constituent. I really care about this thing and it's urgent. This is an appropriate use of that technology. This is an example of how someone is using Twitter. This is not a direct message. This is just their Twitter feed to build a relationship with a legislator. This is somebody, this Tom Giovanetti, I don't know. I have no idea who that is. It's not somebody that I follow, but whoever they are, they really enjoyed hearing a speech that this legislator gave at some point at some luncheon thing that they went to. And that they tagged that legislator. So this @Leach for Texas tag is what made a notification come to this legislator that somebody had mentioned them. Somebody had taken their name potentially in vain, right? Somebody said their name on Twitter. And they looked at that post and they said, oh my gosh, that's so sweet. That guy really enjoyed my speech. And they replied. Now, that guy, later in the session, when Texas Impact, I don't think this particular two guys is the people who are going to get this message, but it might be. When Texas Impact sends a message and it says there's a thing that's really important to us, and it's really important that you direct message your legislator if you're in this particular district, that guy might say, well, I've already, I've had some public facing communication with that legislator. He's obviously, he sees me as an ally. I'm going to go ahead and direct message him and say, I'm the one who said I really enjoyed seeing you at that luncheon in January, right? So that's a way to sort of build that relationship. Finally, this is the way to get to amplify an idea and inform a bunch of people, not just about something you think, but about the idea behind it. So what must have happened here is that Senator Ted Cruz must have said something about renewable energy. And Luke Metzger, who a lot of you know, we've had him speak at UMW before, must have disagreed with it. And so he put his idea about what he thinks about renewable energy out into the Twitter space. But when he did it, he replied to Senator Cruz and he said, but Senator, so he's addressing the senator and giving new information. And you can see that he's giving, it's not just, I think you're wrong. It's some facts that I guess contradict what Senator Cruz probably said. Well, Luke Metzger is an influencer, if you'll remember that list of kinds of people you might impact on Twitter. He's somebody who a lot of people follow, and people would notice if he tweeted something, including legislators. So Erin Zwiener here is a legislator. She's a state legislator, and she retweeted this. And I'm going to guess probably that she said something about it too. So now there's a conversation going on Twitter where people who support renewable energy have taken a tweet that Senator Cruz put out there and sort of used it as a jumping off point to provide factual information about renewables. Also, in doing so, they are highlighting that Senator Ted Cruz apparently does not know or did not agree with that information. So that's probably important for Cruz's constituents to know. And they're sort of positioning themselves. So now the next time Luke Metzger wants to talk to a legislator about something, he might say, well, Erin Zwiener retweeted my tweet about renewables. I'm going to just direct message her and say, Representative Zwiener, I have something important to say about renewables. I bet that's something you'd be interested in. Or he might, next time, he might write a tweet that says, at Representative Zwiener, we've got more great information about renewables I'd love to share with you and your colleagues, and post that on Twitter. And by doing so, all the people who follow Erin Zwiener, which would include probably most other members of the Texas House, they'll all see that and say, well, my goodness, Luke Metzger sent that tweet to Erin Zwiener. I want Luke Metzger to send me a tweet too. And I know some of you think that couldn't possibly happen, but it really would. So I know that you are afraid of Twitter, many of you. Some of you hopefully already have Twitter accounts, but most of you don't. I know you feel like Facebook is great. I understand how it works. I've kind of gotten in a groove with it, and I understand how to unfriend people I don't like. Although I'll tell you, Texas Impact does not approve of unfriending people just because you disagree with them. But Twitter is a different thing. It feels like a poisonous snake. I'm just going to stay away from it. Twitter is not a poisonous snake any more than Facebook is. Sure, you can get in trouble on Twitter. You can get in trouble on your neighborhood listserv, and I have seen people do it a lot, and I bet you have too. Anybody on Nextdoor has seen people who have stepped into a thing they cannot get out of. But Twitter is it is the platform we use for advocacy. It's the best one. It's not going to work for all the UMWs, for you all to come to this event, learn all this great information, and be confident that you're going to go out there and advocate, and then not get on the platform where all the legislators and media are. So Texas Impact has created when I say we created it for you, sure, we created it for everybody, but UMWs, we created it for you. You were in our heads and our hearts every step of the way. This is a video series called Twitter for Advocacy that walks you through setting up a Twitter account, understanding what it looks like, whether it's on your desktop or your pad or your phone, what to do with it, how to use it. And we're here to help you. And if you follow Texas Impact on Twitter, you'll get in real time ideas about what the effective ways are to be using Twitter for advocacy.
Hi, y'all. I'm Ryan, and I'm part of Texas Impact's digital support team. Welcome to part 2 of our video tutorial series, Twitter for Advocacy. In this video, I'll be walking you through your new Twitter account. So let's dive under the hood. Anytime you log onto Twitter, this is the view that you'll be looking at. Over here on the left, you have your navigation menu. Right now, we're on Home, which is where you see your Twitter feed. Your Twitter feed includes tweets, retweets, and liked tweets by people you have chosen to follow. So the 10 people that Twitter just prompted us to follow right before this, that's who's showing up in our feed right now. Over to the right of the feed, we have a What's Happening section. This is a section that Twitter uses to highlight popular tweets, hashtags, and conversations that are getting a lot of attention. This will continually update. Every time you log in, it will be different because the popular information on Twitter changes often. Below the What's Happening section, you'll see suggestions of Twitter accounts or conversations that you might be interested in following. Let's take a harder look at the navigation menu over here on the left side. There's a link that will always take you back home. And below that link is a link called Explore. The Explore page is another area where Twitter can suggest Twitter accounts, hashtags, and conversations that you could potentially be interested in. After Explore, we have Notifications, which will show you all of the instances where other Twitter users have interacted with your tweets publicly. For example, if they liked your tweet or if they made a comment. Next, we've got Messages. You can private message people on Twitter, just like you would on Facebook. You'll find that some Twitter accounts won't accept private messages, but they will mostly be people like reporters, who could expect to get a lot of messages from people they don't know. After that, we've got Bookmarks. So, tweets that you've bookmarked or saved will show up here. And then we've got Lists, which are similar to listservs and Facebook groups. Now we come to our profile. This is what your Twitter profile will look like to other people who visit it. It'll have your profile picture here and a space for a cover photo right behind it. It shows the 160 character bio right below, the date that you joined, and the number of people you're following and your followers. Then below that, it shows you all of your activity. So it'll show any tweets that you post, tweets that you reply to, any media, so any videos or photos that you post will be housed in one section, and then last, any tweets that you've liked. The last section of your Twitter navigation is the triple dot icon, where it says More. When you click there, it will open up an area where you can update your settings. For example, your phone number, your email, your password or username, and any security or data permission settings. And that is your homepage. Welcome to Twitter. Don't forget to follow Texas Impact so we can advocate together.